Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Cyndy Ng. Cyndy serves as the Associate Dean for Students as well as the Director of the Asian American Activities Center on campus. Since joining that staff in 1991, 29 years ago, almost 3 decades ago, she's worked with faculty, staff, and alumni to build community and to create programming and opportunities to support students in both their academic work and their co-curricular endeavors. She also serves on a number of university committees and the Gates Scholarship Advisory Council. And prior to coming to Stanford, she was at Berkeley, with a BA in math. And she also served as a speechwriter for David Dinkins, who became the first African-American mayor of New York City. I will serve as Cyndy's moderator for Q&A, but I'm going to turn over the stage to her to give us an update on the community campus around Asian Americans at Stanford. Cyndy?
Thank you so much, Cyndy, and thank you SAPAC and the SAPAS team for bringing us together. During these difficult times, it's so important for us to be in community. And I also want to join our very eloquent speakers earlier in acknowledging this moment for all of us, the pandemic, for those of us on the West Coast, the fires, those of us in the States, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the racial reckoning in America, the historic anti-Asian racism that has only been compounded by COVID, and the social isolation that all of us are feeling as we speak to each other in our living rooms. But I think, as Srin just said, it's both a challenge and an opportunity to change the political, economic, and social systems that have resulted in the disparities that are so apparent today. So as Cyndy said, I'm tasked with providing an update on our campus community and especially how our students are doing. So I'll start with the pandemic. Our students share the same anxiety and uncertainty that all of us do, but without the life experience that many of us have. As you know, Stanford decided not to bring students back to campus this fall. This is especially difficult for our freshman class. The freshman year is when students find community and belonging and seek out their place at Stanford. And this, of course, is difficult in a virtual world. For students who have been already grappling with social isolation for the last 6 months, continued remote interaction is having an impact. For all students, the challenges include struggling with being at home, for those who are living at home, and the issues that arise with family relationships. For our first generation and low income students, all of these issues exist, plus perhaps issues with Wi-Fi connectivity, taking care of siblings while parents work, or parents who are out of work and feeling the pressure to bring additional income to the family. These challenges have taken a toll on students' mental health and well-being. We just this week interviewed 36 students, freshmen, who applied for 5 of our freshman intern positions. So I think that's a reflection of students really trying to find ways to be connected, albeit virtually. And in those interviews, we interviewed all 36. In those interviews, students, the majority of the students talked about mental health challenges and really wanting to explore resources and coping skills while Stanford students. Access to care can be a challenge if you're not living in California. Stanford counselors cannot provide counseling to students who are not living in California. They can just help them manage care in whatever community they're living. In addition to the pandemic, racial justice is a big issue on campus and for our students. Stanford is grappling with its own reckoning with racial equity and inclusion, especially with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement. Faculty diversity continues to be an issue. Students are demanding that African American studies be departmentalized. Black staff are also meeting with the university about issues of equity. For our Asian American students, They are struggling with where Asian Americans fit in with respect to race in America. On the one hand, they're treated both as the mono-minority and perpetual foreigner, as so many of the speakers have addressed. And this has been heightened with COVID. Our students are seeking to understand their Asian American identity in the context of race in America, in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, in the context of COVID anti-Asian racism, including racist acts on campus that preceded COVID. They're also grappling with the issue of anti-Blackness in their families, and a general, because there's no Asian American studies K through 12. So they have a general lack of understanding of race in America, and they're feeling that they need that they need to be a part of this reckoning that is happening across America. And that brings the issue of Asian American studies at Stanford. Students are wanting, the interest in Asian American studies classes has really increased. The introduction class this fall was, had to be, the enrollment had to be closed because there was too much demand. It was capped, I believe, at 36 students. So the demand for these courses is high, but again, the faculty, it's basically a lecturer teaching. Will Gao, he's been fantastic, but his position is pieced together year by year from 3 different departments, and that isn't a way to sustain Asian American studies or to be able to offer consistent classes so that students can major or minor in it. And it's also not a way to offer the diversity in courses that students are demanding: South Asian studies, Filipino studies, Hmong studies, that reflect the diversity of our student population. So then lastly, what is the AQC doing? We have had to pivot to virtual programming. It has been a challenging 6 months. Our center space is closed, aligning with our mission of community responsibility for the care and safety of our students, our staff, our faculty, but also our essential campus workers, as well as the surrounding communities. So we have been working remotely and exploring different virtual platforms to provide social connections for students, game rooms, cooking demonstrations, dance classes. I know there's a lot of you out there who are more technically proficient maybe than we are, so if you have suggestions, we'd love to hear those. We are also pivoting in terms of our programming to address key issues on students' minds, including what I've mentioned: anti-Blackness in our families and communities, understanding race in America, mixed race identity, COVID-related anti-Asian racism. And at the same time, we're still offering our existing programs around mental health and well-being, around adjusting to Stanford. This is particularly important for our freshmen who are entering in a way that they hadn't imagined, which is virtually. So I'll stop there and see, I think Cyndy is going to curate the questions for me.
Yes, thank you, Cyndy. We have quite a few questions, and thank you for your remarks. That really gave us a kind of a loop back to campus. Some of the questions relate to things that you've already addressed, but probably not in detail. What kind of orientation activities were available to students of Asian American heritage and Pacific Islander heritage?
Yes, we have an Asian American Youth Student Orientation. It was cut short. I think the entire orientation, Stanford orientation, was reduced to 2 days. But we did offer a community welcome where we introduced our staff, some of the students. We had a sophomore student reflect on her experience and her advice to students for how to navigate the freshman year. I believe we had several hundred freshmen attend the event, and they particularly, I think, appreciated the sophomore talking about her experience, her recommendations for how to be connected. We also unveiled our Asian American SIB program, which matches upperclassmen with freshmen maybe about 5 or 6 upperclassmen, 5 or 6 freshmen. And some of you in the audience were part of ASIB. Maybe some of the founders are there, but these are called the families, the SIB families, your big SIBs, your little SIBs. And we're already hearing from freshmen that they have really been helped by their big SIBs in terms of just adjusting. We also had 2 events last week and the previous week around freshman adjustment, a panel of upperclassmen. We had 100 RSVPs to that program, just talking about their adjustment to Stanford and what their advice is to freshmen. This past week, we had the faculty and staff panel talk about how do you navigate the academic space and what resources are available. So we will be continuing to provide resources and advising as the year goes on.
Wow, sounds like you're doing a lot to, and the AQC staff is doing a lot to build community amongst the new students. How can alumni help in this regard? This is one of the questions.
I think one of the, in the spring, we had to pivot to virtual programming, and it was great for alumni because it was a way for you all, without being on campus or near campus or with working lives, to be able to join in on the programming. And so I think students commented that it was great to be connected to alumni in that way. So we always are recommending students to connect with alumni, whether they're exploring careers or they're going to be located in a particular community outside of the Bay Area. We encourage them to look up alumni that are in those communities, because we know you all would be more than willing to connect with our students and to help them. And I think especially in this virtual world, students are going to want those connections. I think it's so uncertain in terms of, Stanford now is in a 4-quarter system, and students can choose what their, it's called a flex quarter. It's what would normally be your summer quarter. So that quarter, I think, is when students will be wanting internships or fellowships to do community service. So that's another way where I think the alumni connection could be helpful in terms of, like, do your jobs, companies provide that kind of internship opportunity? If they haven't in the past, is this something that you can raise, explore, so that students have more of these opportunities when they're taking their flex or their, what was previously their summer quarter. Great. And then we, I think, are always looking for alumni to be speakers on our events as well.
Great, we've got 300 here. So I'm going to bridge over to a couple other questions that relate to the IDEAL initiative. Can you describe what the IDEAL initiative is? There's a few of us who know about it, and it doesn't just measure the diversity of students, but also faculty, and how are we doing with Asian American studies and Asian American faculty? Could you address the IDEAL initiative and then the faculty question?
IDEAL, I have not been as involved with IDEAL, but I believe when Black Lives Matter kind of caused the university to say we need to step it up, I think some new initiatives were added under IDEAL. And Pedro is still here. I think he can probably help with this, but I think there's a racial and equity initiative. There's been some initiatives. I think there's 10 faculty billets that Persis created to hire more faculty who are able to teach courses related to race, ethnicity. There are also new positions for faculty fellows, which can be junior faculty and kind of hopefully pipeline initiatives. They are not specifically targeted to Asian American studies or African American studies or Chicano studies or Native studies. They're just kind of general billets. So it still leaves the question of how do we increase the number of faculty who can actually teach Asian American studies. I mentioned that African American studies students are demanding that it be a department. Right now, Asian American Studies, Comparative Race Studies and Race and Ethnicity is a program. So they're not able to directly hire faculty. So faculty have to sit in another department, be hired by history or political science, et cetera, and then teach Asian American Studies. So the difficulty is they have their departmental responsibilities, their departmental courses they have to teach. So teaching Asian American Studies would be in addition to that. So oftentimes the junior faculty who come in don't have the capacity to teach Asian American Studies on top of, trying to get tenure, et cetera. And so over the summer, there were alumni, many SAPAP members were involved, that circulated a letter to support Asian American Studies. And much of it centered around hiring more faculty who can and will teach Asian American Studies. Also asking that there be a 3-year lecturer position, so that it's not what it is now, where it's pieced together year to year. Will Gao has really helped in the year he's been at Stanford build the program. He's offered for the first time the Intro to Asian American Studies, Intro to Asian American History course, a film class, a family class. And if he were to have a 3-year position, or if any faculty were to have a 3-year position within Asian American Studies, then they could really develop the curriculum and the program and set a foundation for a stronger program. So that was part of this alumni petition, as well as asking alumni to donate to Asian American Studies. So I believe quite a few did. So that's kind of, I think we're still not too far. Pedro has put in an update on IDEAL, but as far as Asian American Studies, I think the same issues that have existed since Asian American Studies was founded still exist, which is lack of faculty, lack of courses. And it's something students are going to be working on this year as well.
Great, thank you. This is a tough topic. Let me bridge to something a little bit perhaps more of interest on the social and athletic side. Can you comment on the impact of Stanford's cutting some of the D1 sports, or the actual, I think there were 11 sports that were impacted on the specifically Asian Pacific Islander students?
I'm not the best one to speak to that issue. Yes, they did cut, some of the, I think, sailing and some other sports, they said due to budget issues. We do have a lot of student organizations. They're centered on a lot on martial arts. But they're kind of like these extracurricular activities. Some of our students are involved in the intramural sports, but I really am not that versed in how the cutting of those specific sports programs have impacted any of our students. I haven't heard anything. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's all right. I mean, when we get to the, for those in the audience still, after we conclude the official program, we do have about 30 minutes in breakout rooms, and Cyndy has made herself available, and those who join that room may have some answers and questions on the issues of sports. Have another question about, Cyndy, if you have any thoughts about Stanford's ability or strategies to recruit from underrepresented Asian Pacific Islander communities, including Southeast Asians, Filipino, Pacific Islanders in particular.
Great question. We work with a liaison in admissions, Vince Mua. He's also a Stanford alum. He was AQC staff, and he's really been working very hard to push the admissions office to look at the underrepresented ethnicities. This was something that students actually fought for in 2005, where, because Asian Americans are not considered an underrepresented minority, they called it URMs. And we were at the time in 05, 24%. So the university is kind of, well, we're good. But Filipino and Vietnamese students said, no, we're very underrepresented. So that was when they pushed the university to acknowledge that there is diversity within the Asian American umbrella, and that there are underrepresented ethnicities under the Asian American umbrella. So from that time, I think there was more outreach on the part of admissions to Southeast Asian, Filipino communities. We just, this past week, I believe, talked to about 200 high school students from underrepresented ethnicities. So Cambodian, Hmong, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Filipino students, high school students who Vince has been trying to recruit to Stanford. So there's definitely an understanding that we're not done, that there are still underrepresented. I think the census showed that 10 years ago, showed that the largest growing Asian populations are from Bangladesh and Pakistan. And so AQC at that time, we anticipated that we would be getting more applicants from those ethnicities. And this year, we actually had Bengali and Pakistani students apply to be freshman interns. So it's changing slowly. I think it's something that we need to keep on top of. I think for alumni who are in different parts of the country, Minnesota, I think there are alumni from Minnesota. There's large Hmong populations there. If you're still connected to your high schools and your counselors, it would be a great help to really talk to them about looking at those ethnicities and encouraging them to consider Stanford.
Great, Cyndy. We're almost at the end of our time. There's a couple of really good questions. One I'm going to have to ask because there's two people who asked this. What happened to East House? What's the level of interest in East Asian studies on campus?
East House, I don't know how long ago. The students choosing to live in the East Asian themed dorm declined. And so the RFs, Anthony Antonio in education and Christine Min Watipka also in education and sociology, they decided to pivot because they were both in education and change East House to Education, Society, and I can't remember what the S&T stand for, but it's now focused on education due to, I think, the decline in interest. There's still a Center for East Asian Studies. There's still, I believe, a major, but the interest in living in the theme dorm had declined to the point where they changed the focus.
Thank you, Cyndy. And thank you for being here with us all day. I know you checked in early and you were the last on the program. But with that, thanks to all the speakers. I'm going to transition to the very end of our program here. Thank you all for participating, registering, listening to us in terms of using the chat, the Slido, being on mute, being with no video. We wanted this to be more of a reunion experience, but could only manage so much technology all at one time. I think everybody on the planning team and our speakers deserve a huge round of applause for making this happen. Very few errors and a lot of great questions, a lot of great discourse. I appreciate everybody for being so engaged.
Now, we're very happy to offer a musical performance by one of Stanford's multi-talented singing groups, Raagapella. Stanford is blessed to have so many accomplished students who excel not only academically, of course, but artistically. And here to introduce the performance are Raagapella's co-presidents, Kailash Rama and Gita Krishna.
Stanford Raagapella is Stanford's South Asian fusion a cappella group. We sing music that spans a wide variety of cultures and musical styles, from contemporary Desi to Indian classical to American pop. It's an honor to perform virtually at the 2020 Stanford Asian Pacific American Alumni Summit. We hope you enjoy our rendition of Ma Tujhe Salam, Vande Mataram. Vande Mataram is an ode to one's motherland and has a long history of representing ideals of unity and collective good. This renowned song was originally written in Sanskrit and Bengali in the 1870s by Indian poet Bankim Chanda Chattopadhyay. There are many musical variations of this piece, which continues to be a celebrated hymn even today.
Our performance today is based off of a contemporary adaptation of Vande Mataram, coined Ma Tujhe Salam, written by one of the most acclaimed South Asian composers, A.R. Rahman. Our a cappella rendition of Ma Tujhe Salam is one of Stanford Raagapella's earliest arrangements and has been passed down through the group for over 2 decades. It's one of the arrangements that any Raag alum will instantly recognize, because every cohort has performed it at some point. It has evolved over the years as we transitioned from an all-male group to an all-gender group, but we have retained a lot of the fundamental aspects of this arrangement that make it so special to our group. Musically, this is one of Raagapella's favorite pieces. We hope you enjoy it.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Dum Dum Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Dum Dum Vande Mataram. यहाँ वहाँ सारा जहाँ देख लिया है, कहीं भी तेरे जैसा कोई नहीं है। 80 नहीं 100 दिन दुनिया घुमा मैं, नहीं कहीं तेरे जैसा कोई नहीं है। मैं गया जहाँ भी बस तेरी याद थी, जो मेरे साथ थी, मुझको तड़पाती रुलाती। सबसे प्यारी तेरी सूरत, प्यार है बस तेरा प्यार ही। माँ तुझे सलाम, माँ तुझे सलाम, ओ माँ तुझे सलाम। वंदे मातरम, 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 वंदे मातरम। तेरे पास ही मैं रहा हूँ, अपनी बाहें खोल दे, जोर से मुझको गले लगा ले, मुझको फिर वो प्यार दे। तू ही जिंदगी है, तू ही मेरी मोहब्बत है, तेरे ही पैरों में जन्नत है। तू ही दिन तू जा, माँ तुझे सलाम, माँ तुझे सलाम, माँ तुझे सलाम, माँ तुझे सलाम। वंदे मातरम, 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 वंदे मातरम।
Thanks once again to Raagapella, Kailash, and Gita for sharing their music with us.